They thought she was just a cleaner. What they didn't know was that she held a doctorate in macroeconomics. After losing her husband and moving to London, her credentials were dismissed, so she cleaned offices to survive, until the day she walked into a boardroom and said, "Run it at 12%. That line will spike retention, 5-10 every morning, before the sky over London decided what shade of gray it wanted to be. Amara Johnson stepped off the bus and pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. The wind moved differently here. In Lagos, mornings arrived warm and alive, thick with humidity and sound. In London, mornings arrived restrained, quiet, as if the city had not yet decided whether it trusted you. She crossed the street toward Halcyon Global Glass Tower, its polished exterior reflecting a version of her that looked smaller than she felt. The badge clipped to her uniform read, "Facilities." 8 months earlier, another name had preceded hers, Dr. Amara Okoye, professor of macroeconomics, University of Lagos. The first time she stood before a lecture hall of 200 restless students, she felt something holy in the responsibility. Numbers were not just numbers to her. They were stories about people. Inflation meant food costs. Exchange rates meant medicine. Debt meant futures rewritten. Her husband used to tease her. "You speak about GDP like it's a living person." "It is," she would reply. "It breathes through households." On the morning he died, the air had been thick with heat. He stood by the doorway adjusting his tie, smiling at her over his shoulder. "Don't terrify your students today," he joked. "They should be terrified of bad fiscal policy," she said, barely looking up from her notes. He crossed the room and kissed the top of her head. "Come home early," he told her. She had intended to. She never saw him alive again. The call came during her lecture. She ignored it once, twice. By the third vibration, something inside her tightened. The hospital corridor was too bright, too white. The doctor's tone was too gentle. Massive cerebral hemorrhage. No warning. No time. She sat beside his body long after the doctor left. She placed her hand over his chest, as if she could make it to rise again. "Lord," she whispered, not loudly, not dramatically, "you are still God, even now." But faith in that moment was not a declaration. It was a lifeline she held with trembling fingers. At the burial, red earth clung to the hems of garments. Hymns rose unevenly into the heavy sky. Her son Chitty gripped her hand so tightly she could feel his pulse on her own. "Mama," he asked quietly, "why didn't God stop it?" The question lodged deep. She knelt in the dust and pressed her forehead to his. "I don't know," she said, "but we are still here." That night, after mourners left in silence settled thick in the house, she knelt beside her bed, not because she was strong, but because she was breaking. "I cannot carry this alone," she said into the dark. And in the quiet, she did not hear a voice, but she felt something steadier than despair. Breath, still breathing. 3 months later, she realized staying in Lagos meant living inside echoes. His shoes by the door, his handwriting in kitchen drawers, his laughter in the walls. London was not ambitious. It was survival. It was space to rebuild without constant memory pressing against her ribs. She sold furniture, packed degrees carefully inside waterproof sleeves. At the airport, Chitty looked up at her. "Will Daddy know where we are?" She swallowed. "Yes," she said. "He will." London did not welcome her with open arms. The first university interview felt promising. The recruiter smiled politely, fingers resting on her CV. Impressive background. Hope stirred. However, accreditation alignment may require revalidation. Months, perhaps a year. The second interview suggested retraining. The third recommended starting as a teaching assistant until equivalency is determined. Each office smelled of polish and quiet dismissal. Savings thinned. Rent did not care about academic prestige. Faith became less poetic and more practical. "Give us this day our daily bread," she whispered one night over spreadsheets of expenses. The cleaning job was not supposed to be permanent. It was a bridge, just until the next door opened. The first night inside Halcyon, she moved quietly through corridors lined with glass. Strategy decks glowed faintly on unattended screens. Financial models blinked in frozen projections. She paused in boardroom seat at a presentation slide, remained open. West Africa expansion strategy. Her mind sharpened instantly. Currency assumptions. Stabilization windows. Political risk weighting. She leaned closer. They're underestimating volatility, she murmured. Her reflection in the dark screen looked back at her. Still sharp, still capable, just unseen. Night after night, she cleaned around conversations about growth and expansion. She listened without meaning to. She recalculated in her head without trying. It felt almost sinful to know so much and say so little. One evening, as she wiped down a long conference table, she whispered softly, "Lord, if you still have a purpose for me, make room for it." Behind the glass walls, Elena watched her. Elena had been at Halcyon long enough to recognize patterns. Executives skimmed slides. Analysts defended projections. But the cleaner studied charts. Not casually, intentionally. One night, Elena lingered by the doorway as Amara stood near a screen left glowing with financial forecasts. "You understand that?" Elena asked quietly. Amara turned. "Yes." No arrogance. No performance. Just the truth. Elena felt something shift inside her. Helping her would be risky. Access logs were monitored. Training portals required clearance. But ignoring excellence felt worse. Later that night, Elena sat at her desk staring at the internal learning portal. Her cursor hovered. Share access. If discovered, she could lose everything she'd worked for. She closed her eyes briefly. "Do what is right," she whispered, surprised at herself. She clicked. The email was sent. A small act of rebellion entered the system. Amara saw the access invitation after midnight. Her hands trembled slightly. She knew what it meant. Risk. Trust. She bowed her head over the small kitchen table in her flat. "Let me steward this well," she prayed. Outside, London rain tapped softly against the window. Inside, something long dormant began to awaken. And neither of them yet knew that within weeks, a boardroom full of executives would be forced to listen to a voice they had never thought to hear. And studied Halcyon's internal training modules, risk modeling frameworks, international valuation structures, commodity hedging strategies. She moved through them quickly, not because they were simple, but because they were familiar. The language was different. The principles were not. One night, she paused over a case study on emerging market volatility. The scenario described infrastructure optimism in developing economies over confidence in currency stabilization after election cycles. She felt a chill. It was exactly what she had seen glowing on that boardroom screen. Her pen moved across paper as she recalculated assumptions longhand. 12% volatility corridor minimum, possibly 14. Anything lower was wishful thinking dressed as strategy. Across the city, Elena lay awake staring at her ceiling. Had she been reckless? If the log were audited, her credentials were attached to the access share. The compliance team did not tolerate unauthorized privileges. She imagined being called into HR. "Why did you grant facility staff internal modeling access?" Because she deserved it. The answer would not protect her. Yet something in her conscience felt settled. "Let integrity be louder than fear," she whispered into the dark. At Halcyon, Acquisition Week arrived with visible tension. The expansion into West Africa was not just another deal. It was Lawson's signature initiative. 18 months of negotiation, investor presentations, press anticipation. The board expected execution, not hesitation. Lawson thrived in certainty. He believed leadership meant decisiveness, momentum, forward motion without visible doubt. He reviewed the final projections alone in his office at night. Before the meeting, the 5-year revenue curve rose smoothly, confidently. The risk summary fell neatly within acceptable tolerance. 6% volatility corridor. He stared at it. Something tugged faintly at the edge of his mind. Had they stress tested beyond that? The analyst had mentioned alternative scenarios weeks ago. But the numbers at 12% looked unnecessarily pessimistic. Markets were stabilizing. Infrastructure investments were increasing. He dismissed the discomfort. Leadership requires confidence. The next morning, Amara felt a shift as soon as she stepped off the bus. The building buzzed differently. Assistants moved quickly. Investors' cars lined the curb outside. Even security teams stood straighter. She pushed her cleaning cart down the corridor outside the executive boardroom. Through the glass walls, she saw them assembling, Lawson at the head of the table, investors from Berlin and Tokyo, the lead analyst adjusting slides nervously. The screen lit up. West Africa expansion final acquisition vote. Her stomach tightened. She had reviewed the internal data the night before. The volatility assumption remained unchanged, 6%. She stood still. Inside, the presentation began. The analyst spoke carefully. Based on current stabilization trends, we project manageable exposure within a 6% volatility corridor. Lawson nodded. Confidence. Controlled. An investor raised a hand. What if volatility exceeds that? The analyst hesitated slightly. Our assessment indicates that is unlikely. Unlikely? Amara felt her pulse in her throat. Unlikely was not modeling. It was hope. Inside, discussion grew sharper. If currency swings past 10%, another investor pressed, what is our downside? The analyst clicked through slides too quickly. We anticipate minimal impact due to minimal, the investor interrupted. The room tightened. Lawson leaned forward. We are not delaying this acquisition based on improbable worst-case scenarios. The word improbable echoed. Amara's grip tightened on the cleaning cart handle. Her mind recalculated automatically. Agricultural export decline. Political transition fragility. Commodity pricing exposure. 12% volatility was not improbable. It was predictable. Inside, the analyst faltered again. If volatility exceeds our corridor, the 5-year return compresses. How much? The investor demanded. The analyst adjusted numbers on the screen. The curve dipped slightly. Not enough. He wasn't weighing it correctly. Amara stepped closer to the glass. Her reflection merged with the projection. Her heart pounded. This was not her title, not her meeting, not her authority. But the consequences would be real. Jobs, investments, reputations. She closed her eyes for one brief second. Give me courage, she whispered. Inside, Lawson's voice sharpened. We moved forward. We prepared for 18 months. This is execution. Something inside her decided. She pushed the door open. No one noticed at first. The debate had grown louder. She walked toward the screen. The analyst looked up, confused. Excuse me, this is a close. You've underweight the currency instability multiplier, she said calmly. Silence. Lawson turned slowly. His expression hardened. This is a board meeting. Yes, she replied. Her voice did not shake. You're modeling against last quarter stabilization window. It doesn't account for post-election contraction. The analyst blinked. How do you... Your agricultural export baseline is lagging 2 quarters, she continued, and your commodity offset hedge assumes linear recovery. The room froze. Investors looked from her to the screen. Lawson's jaw tightened. And you are? Amara Johnson. No title, just her name. In facilities, someone murmured. She met Lawson's gaze steadily. Run the model at 12% volatility. The analyst hesitated. Lawson said nothing. An investor spoke instead. Run it. Numbers shifted. The curve changed. It flattened, then dipped sharply. The room exhaled collectively. Run 14. Amara added quietly. The analyst's fingers trembled slightly. The projection dipped further. Silence filled every inch of space. Lawson stared at the screen. The smooth upward curve he presented for weeks now fractured under adjusted reality. His chest tightened. Had he ignored warning signs? Has confidence crossed into arrogance? He turned slowly toward her. What's your background? I was a professor of macroeconomics. A beat. University of Lagos. One investor straightened. I've read corridor volatility research from Lagos, he said quietly. Lawson felt something inside him resist. This was his room, his deal, his authority. And yet the numbers on the screen did not lie. Leadership, he realized in that suspended moment, was not the absence of correction. It was the willingness to absorb it. He looked back at the model, then at her. What do you recommend? The question surprised even him, but it was honest. She answered without hesitation. Delayed execution. Renegotiate valuation with a volatility clause. Build downside hedge through commodity offset contracts. Protect the downside before chasing the upside. The room absorbed that. An investor nodded slowly. That mitigates exposure. The analyst swallowed. She's right. Lawson closed his eyes briefly. Just a second, then opened them. We adjourn for recalculation, he said evenly. Authority still intact, but altered. The meeting dissolved into murmurs. Elena sat frozen at the far end of the table. Her secret was standing in the center of the room, and the room was listening. The boardroom did not empty quickly. Clusters formed in quiet corners. Investors spoke in low, urgent tones. The analysts remained seated, staring at the altered graph as if willing it to return to its earlier optimism. Amara stood still beside the screen. She had not planned beyond speaking. Now the consequences were unfolding. Lawson approached her slowly. Up close, his authority felt different, less imposing, more human. You understand, he said carefully, that walking into that meeting could have cost you your position. Yes, and possibly others. Her eyes flickered briefly toward Elena, then back to him. Yes. Then why did you do it? The question was not an accusation now. It was genuine. She held his gaze. Because the numbers were wrong, and wrong numbers become real losses. A pause. My husband taught me that silence can be expensive. The statement landed heavier than she intended. Lawson studied her face. There was no triumph there, no hunger for recognition, only conviction. Come to my office, he said, inside the corridor. Elena remained seated for several seconds after the room cleared. Her pulse still raced. Compliance logs. Access permissions. If Lawson asked for an audit, she inhaled slowly. Whatever happens, she whispered to herself, let it have been worth it. In Lawson's office, rain streaked the glass in thin lines. He gestured for Amara to sit. She remained standing until he did, then took the chair opposite him. Respect, but not submission. He noticed that. How long have you been with Halcyon? 8 months. In facilities? Yes. And before London? She told him. Lagos University. Lecture halls filled with students debating fiscal policy, her husband's death, the relocation, the interviews, the polite rejections. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back slowly. You applied here? Twice. He felt heat rise behind his eyes. HR filters, automated credential systems, foreign accreditation flags. He had approved those systems. Efficiency, standardization, risk reduction, and yet excellence had been sweeping his floors. He stood and walked to the window. We pride ourselves on identifying talent, he said quietly. It appears we missed something obvious. She did not respond. He turned back. What would you have done differently if you were leading this acquisition from the start? The question carried weight. It was not symbolic. It was serious. She leaned forward slightly. I would have built in pessimism early. Stress-tested worst-case scenarios publicly. Invited dissent before certainty hardened. He absorbed that. Invited dissent. He had rewarded confidence. Punished hesitation. Perhaps unintentionally silenced caution. You think I silence dissent, he said. I think confidence can make disagreement uncomfortable, she replied gently. He almost smiled. Direct, measured, accurate. You won't be returned to facilities, he said finally. A small silence followed. Effective immediately. You will consult with our risk team while we formalize placement. And Elena? She asked quietly. There it was. Not self-preservation. Concern. He noticed. Elena? She shared internal training access. Lawson's eyebrows lifted slightly. Honesty again. She risked her position. He considered that. Integrity layered on integrity. I'll handle Elena, he said, not threatening. Resolute. Later that afternoon, Elena sat in HR. Her palms felt damp against her skirt. Lawson entered himself. HR straightened immediately. "We've reviewed access logs," the compliance officer began. Elena's stomach tightened. Lawson raised a hand. "Access was authorized retroactively," he said evenly. The officer blinked. "Sir, Elena identified underutilized talent and facilitated skill development aligned with company interests." He turned to Elena. "In the future, bring it to me directly." "Yes, sir." HR nodded cautiously. The meeting ended. In the corridor, Elena exhaled shakily. "Thank you," she said. Lawson regarded her carefully. "You saw something others missed." "Yes." "Why?" She hesitated. "Because she looked at the numbers the way I do." He studied her for a moment longer. "Good," he said simply. That evening, the executive team reconvened. Revised projections glowed on the screen. 12% corridor, 14% stress test, downside hedges modeled properly. The acquisition would proceed, but with renegotiated terms. Volatility clause inserted. Commodity offset secured. Protection before expansion. An investor leaned back. "This is stronger." Lawson nodded. "It is." He did not mention who had prompted the recalculation. Not yet, but the room knew. Amara sat at the table this time. No cleaning cart. No uniform. Still quiet. Still observant. But visible. After the meeting, one of the Berlin investors approached her. "You saved us from a painful headline," he said lightly. She smiled faintly. "I prefer prevention to repair." That night, she arrived home later than usual. Chitty sat at the kitchen table drawing. "Mama," he said, jumping up. "You're late." "Yes." "Did you teach someone again?" She knelt to his height. "Yes." He studied her carefully. "Are you still cleaning?" She paused. "No," she said softly. "Not anymore." His eyes widened. "See? I told you God didn't forget." The simplicity of his faith undid her more than the boardroom had. After he slept, she stood by the window. London lights shimmered below. "Thank you," she whispered. Not for recognition, not for status, but for courage in the moment it was needed. Across the city, Lawson sat alone in his office. He replayed the meeting in his mind. Her voice, calm, certain. He felt the quiet discomfort of ego confronted. He had almost dismissed her, almost doubled down that almost silence correction. Leadership, he realized, was not about never being wrong. It was about being willing to be interrupted by truth. He picked up his phone. "Schedule a company-wide briefing tomorrow," he told his assistant. "Yes, sir." "And add Dr. Amara Johnson to the agenda." He paused before saying her title, but he said it deliberately. Dr. Correction deserved recognition, not concealment. The next morning, employees gathered in the main atrium. Whispers moved through the crowd. Why was the CEO addressing everyone? Lawson stepped to the podium. Behind him, Amara stood quietly. He cleared his throat. "Yesterday," he began, "we nearly executed a decision based on incomplete modeling." The room stilled. Correction came from an unexpected place. He turned slightly. "Dr. Amara Johnson identified critical risk. Variables our systems failed to weigh appropriately." Murmurs spread. Facility staff exchanged confused glances. She will now join our risk and strategy division. Applause began slowly, then grew. Amara felt heat rise behind her eyes. Not from pride, from relief, from vindication, from the quiet faith that had carried her through silence. Lawson stepped closer to the microphone. "We must build systems that recognize excellence wherever it resides," he continued, "and leaders who listen when it speaks." He stepped aside. She approached the podium. Hand steady, voice calm. "Thank you," she began. "But I did not create new insight. I simply applied what I have always known." She glanced briefly toward the ceiling of glass above them. Truth does not change when titles do. Silence followed. Not awkward, reflective. And somewhere in the back of the atrium, Elena smiled. The applause in the atrium faded slowly, but the shift inside Halcyon did not. People look at Amara differently now. Not with pity, not with dismissal, with recalibration. That afternoon, she was given a temporary office with a small interior, no window, but it felt vast compared to invisibility. A desk, A monitor, access credentials bearing her name, without the word facilities beneath it. Dr. Amar Johnson. She traced the letters briefly with her eyes before sitting down. Steward this well, she whispered under her breath, because visibility, she knew, was another kind of responsibility. Across the floor, whispers continued. Some were admiring. Some are skeptical. From cleaner to strategy? Overnight. Must be a PR move. Excellence does not silence suspicion. It often invites it. By midweek, resistance surfaced more directly. The senior risk director, Martin Hale, entered her office without knocking. He had been with Halcyon for 12 years. He had weathered market crashes, regulatory shifts, mergers. He did not appreciate disruption. I assume you'll be reporting through my division, he said, standing rather than sitting. Yes, she replied calmly. He studied her for a moment. I hope you understand that identifying and modeling oversight once is not equivalent to sustained strategic oversight. I agree, she said evenly. That answer disarmed him slightly. I built the current framework, he continued. It's been stress-tested extensively. I'm sure it has, she replied. No sarcasm, no challenge, just steadiness. He folded his arms. Then perhaps you can explain why our team didn't identify the volatility corridor issue. She met his gaze. Because dissent wasn't structurally encouraged. He stiffened. That's a bold claim. It's an observation. Silence lingered. Confidence in compressed discussion, she added gently, especially when outcomes are already favored. He exhaled slowly. You're implying we protected a narrative. I'm suggesting we protect momentum. The distinction mattered. He studied her longer this time. There was no ambition in her tone, no desire to undermine, only clarity. I'll expect you at the full framework review tomorrow, he said finally. I'll be there. When he left, she allowed herself one slow breath. Resistance was not unexpected. Promotion without precedent disrupts hierarchy. That night, she stayed late reviewing internal documentation, not to prove herself, to understand the architecture she had stepped into. Systems revealed culture. Assumptions revealed leadership. Patterns revealed fear. Near midnight, Lawson entered the strategy floor quietly. He had done that often before, observed from a distance. He paused when he saw her still working. Don't have to prove anything overnight, he said. She looked up. I'm not trying to. Then why are you still here? She considered the question. Because excellence should not be accidental, she said. It should be repeatable. He nodded slowly. That will require change. Yes. And change invites friction. Yes. He studied her carefully. You don't seem afraid of friction. I've survived worse. He did not ask her to elaborate. Instead, he said quietly, neither faith nor strategy functions well without pressure. The statement surprised her. Do you have faith? She asked gently. He gave a small, almost reluctant smile. Less loudly than you. She returned the faintest smile. Sometimes quiet faith is steadier. The next morning's framework review was tense. Senior analysts filled the conference room. Martin stood at the head, presenting revised structures. Dr. Johnson will address volatility weighting adjustments, he said, voice neutral. Not warm, not cold, neutral. She rose. The screen behind her displayed comparative models. The current framework weights political volatility at 6% maximum exposure, she began. Historical data across comparable regions suggests 12 to 14% during post-election cycles. An analyst raised a hand. That inflates risk projections significantly. Yes, she replied, because risk was underinflated previously. Murmurs. Another voice. Markets are stabilizing globally. She nodded. Stability trends are not uniform. Correlated commodity fluctuations amplify regional instability. Martin watched closely. She was not defensive, not combative. Measured, grounded. One analyst leaned forward. If we model at 14% consistently, won't we lose competitive positioning? She met his eyes. If positioning depends on optimism rather than protection, it is fragile. Silence. The room recalculated. Martin stepped forward. Run the adjusted framework, he instructed. Numbers shifted across the screen. Exposure metrics changed. Profit margins compressed slightly, but downside buffers strengthened. After several minutes of analysis, Martin nodded slowly. This is stronger, not admission. Acknowledgement. The meeting adjourned with less resistance than it began. As employees filtered out, Martin remained behind. You were right about something else, he said quietly. She waited. Confidence can compress dissent. A small pause. I may have allowed that. She inclined her head. Correction strengthens leadership. He gave a short nod. Let's strengthen it. That evening, Lawson convened a smaller executive discussion. Post-meeting politics had begun. 2 board members questioned the public acknowledgement. Elevating a former cleaner so visibly sets a precedent. One warned. Yes, Lawson replied. That may encourage others. I hope it does, he said evenly. The other board member leaned forward. You risk destabilizing hierarchy. Lawson's gaze sharpened. If hierarchy depends on invisibility of talent, it deserves destabilization. Silence. He continued. We nearly executed a flawed acquisition. Correction came from someone outside our executive filter. He leaned back. That is not a threat. It is a lesson. The board members exchanged glances. The acquisition renegotiation was progressing smoothly under revised terms. Investors were satisfied. Loss had been prevented. Results muted resistance. That night, as Amara tucked Chitty into bed, he looked at her seriously. Mama? Yes. Do you still talk to God about numbers? She laughed softly. Yes. What does he say? She smoothed his hair gently. He says wisdom is a gift, and gifts are meant to be used. Chitty nodded solemnly. Then use it. After he slept, she sat alone at the kitchen table. Her promotion felt unreal. Fragile. She opened her Bible quietly, not searching for triumph, for grounding. Her eyes fell on a single line. Do not despise small beginnings. She closed the book gently. Cleaning floors had not been a humiliation. It had been preparation. And preparation, she realized, often looks ordinary until the moment it becomes essential. The weeks that followed did not feel cinematic. They felt demanding. Correction had opened the door, but staying in the room required endurance. Emails multiplied. Risk reports stacked high. Strategy sessions stretched long past sunset. Visibility brought scrutiny. Some colleagues leaned in with respect. Others watched for failure. Amara understood both. Excellence that emerges from outside hierarchy unsettles those who built it. One afternoon, an analyst challenged her openly during a review. With respect, he said, though his tone carried more tension than respect, your approach increases caution to the point of paralysis. She did not respond immediately. She let the room sit with the statement. Caution, she said finally, is not paralysis. It is preparation. He crossed his arms. We can't model fear. We're not modeling fear, she replied calmly. We're modeling reality. The room quieted. Martin watched the exchange closely. Months ago, he might have intervened to protect the status quo. Now, he observed something different. Her steadiness did not provoke escalation. It diffused it. The analyst exhaled slowly. Then show us how to balance both. She nodded. Optimism should be earned by protection, not assumed before it. She turned to the screen. Let's build 2 models. One aspiration, one fortified. Then we compare. The tension shifted into engagement. Hands moved across keyboards. Discussion turned constructive. This was not rebellion. It was refined. Later that evening, Lawson requested a private conversation. They met in the same office where weeks earlier she had first sat across from him. You've changed the temperature of the room, he said. She tilted her head slightly. In what way? Disagreement doesn't feel dangerous anymore. She considered that. That wasn't intentional. It rarely is, he replied. He walked to the window, then back again. I built my career on decisive leadership, he said quietly. Certainty. Momentum. She waited. But certainty can become insulation, he admitted. And insulation can block truth. The confession was not dramatic. It was measured, vulnerable in a restrained way. You adjusted, she said gently. He looked at her. I was interrupted. She smiled faintly. Sometimes interruption is grace. He held her gaze for a moment longer. Your faith seems steady, he observed. It has been tested, she replied. He nodded slowly. I lost my father when I was young, he said, almost as an afterthought. I decided early that control was safer than surrender. She absorbed that quietly. Control feels safer, she said, until it fails. And surrender feels terrifying, she answered, until it steadies you. Silence lingered, not awkward, reflective. He returned to his desk. We're restructuring internal talent identification systems, he said. Credential filters will be revised. International accreditation pathways reassessed. She blinked softly. That's significant. So was the oversight. He paused. You didn't just save a deal. He did not finish the sentence. He didn't need to. At home, Chitty had begun telling his classmates about his mother. She fixes companies, he announced proudly one evening at dinner. She laughed. I helped him think. That's the same thing, he insisted. Later that night, after he slept, she sat by the window once more. London no longer felt foreign. It felt layered. The early buses, the silent elevators, the boardroom doors, the applause, the resistance, the recalibration. She folded her hands loosely in her lap. Thank you, she whispered again. Not for promotion, for preservation, for courage in the moment when silence would have been easier, for Elena's risk, for Lawson's humility, for numbers that told the truth instead of ego. The following quarter, Halcyon announced its revised acquisition publicly. The market responded positively. Analysts praised the built-in volatility protections. Financial media highlighted the firm's disciplined risk posture. In the press release, a single line appeared near the bottom. Risk modeling adjustments were led by Dr. Amara Johnson. It was not dramatic. It was accurate, and accuracy, she had always believed, was enough. One afternoon, Elena stopped by her office. I was terrified that day, Elena admitted. So was I, Amara replied. Elena laughed softly. You didn't look at it. Courage rarely looks like shaking, Amara said, but it often is. They sat in companionable silence for a moment. I'm glad I clicked send, Elena said. So am I, Amara replied. Across the floor, Martin adjusted a framework document and sent it to her for review, not defensively, collaboratively. Hierarchy had not vanished. It had matured. Months later, Lawson stood once more at the atrium addressing employees. This time, the topic was internal culture. We measure performance rigorously, he said. We will now measure humility with equal seriousness. Light laughter moved through the crowd. But humility, he continued, is not weakness. It is openness to correction. He glanced briefly toward where Amara stood among the strategy team. Excellence can arrive from anywhere, he said. Our responsibility is to recognize it. When the gathering dispersed, Amara lingered briefly beneath the glass ceiling. Sunlight streamed through in narrow beams. She remembered the first morning she had stood outside those same doors, holding a cleaning cart. Invisible, overlooked, still capable. She whispered softly, I did not forget who I was. And more importantly, God had not forgotten either. Her journey had not been about revenge, not about proving executives wrong, not about public vindication. It had been about stewardship, of knowledge, of courage, of opportunity when it finally came. As she walked back to her office, employees nodded in greeting, not because she had once cleaned their conference tables, but because she had strengthened their foundation. In the quiet of her workspace, she opened a fresh document, new projections, new models, new risks to evaluate. The work continued, because excellence is not a single moment in a boardroom. It is the discipline of showing up prepared when the moment arrives. And when it does, speaking. Even if your badge once said facilities, even if your title was overlooked, even if the room did not expect your voice. Truth does not require permission. It requires courage. And courage, she had learned, is often born in quiet places, on early buses, in midnight prayers, in invisible seasons, until the day a door opens and the room falls silent. Welcome to Lumen Whisper, where underestimated people rise, where truth breaks through, and where courage is louder than fear. If this story resonated with you, subscribe and stand with this community. We're building a space for people who believe character still matters, and that integrity always has a voice. Share this with someone who needs strength today, or someone who's been told they're just something. There's no just about you. You matter. You are seen. You are valuable. And you are deeply loved here. Virtual hugs keep rising.